Welcome everyone to the Joseph Zuken Citizen Activist Award and the launch of the State of the Inner City report. My name is Molly McCracken. I am the Manitoba Director of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and your host here today. Thank you so much for joining us. I just see folks joining us right now. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat there. In years past, before COVID, we would all be joining together at Thunderbird House for a wonderful feast and community event. So fingers crossed for next year, but it is nice to be all together here, at least online, and to see each other's names. We're doing a webinar format here just because of the scale of the event. We have over 200 people registered today, so we did want to make sure that we had the Zoom appropriate to our event today. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We are broadcasting here on from Treaty 1 territory, the homeland of the Métis Nation and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people. The electricity powering our computers comes from Northern Manitoba, Treaty 5 territories, and the water that sustains us is from Shoal Lake First Nation, Treaty 3 territory. And I wish to take a moment to consider the traditional lands we are on here today. Manitoba and the inner city of Winnipeg are located on Indigenous land, and it is an incredible ongoing injustice that the people whose land that we as settlers live on continue to experience the highest rates of poverty in our community. This is completely unacceptable, and our work is one effort towards redressing this. We all have a collective responsibility towards truth, reconciliation, and decolonization. I also wish to acknowledge that this month is Black History Month, and to say that Black Lives Matter. Canada has a deep, long, and ongoing problem of racism, and a just recovery from COVID must redress inequities created by systemic racism. And our effort here today. We're extremely honored that Geraldine Shingoose, as we call her Grandma Shingas, is here with us today to share a blessing and some words with us. On Louis Riel Day, I got to pay a visit to her and offered her some tobacco in a safe way for joining us today. So I will introduce Geraldine Shingoose. Her spirit names are Sky Woman and Northern Lights. She comes from the Bear Clan. She is a 9-year residential school warrior, attending the Musqueam Residential School from 1962 to 1971. Her First Nation community is Tutewabizewik, Treaty Reserve, Treaty 4 territory, and she is a matriarchal grandmother who brings support and love to the community. So thanks so much for bringing a blessing to us over Zoom today, Grandma Shingoose.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you for the invite. And it was a true honor to meet with you the other day, and just let everybody know that I received the tobacco, and it's in COVID, it's a real trying time. Sometimes people forget to offer the tobacco, or so I just really thank Molly for making that attempt and gifting that tobacco. So this tobacco is offered, is offering so that I can say some words. When we met, Molly had asked me to offer some words and offer blessing for this event. There's so much to share, and I'll be brief, but there are a lot of things happening, like here in Winnipeg and across Canada. Like, on January 25th, Williams Lake First Nation found 93 burial sites in their residential school area. And then on February 16th, Kisiko's First Nation found 54. That's like, not even a week or so ago. And so in total, like, within the last month, there's been 147 possible burial sites. So I'm quite active in that, and bringing voice for the little ancestors, and that's what I've been doing since the TRC came to a close in 2015. I often get called to do events like this, but sometimes when I do events like this, incidents do happen or occur, like, within the community. And I just want to acknowledge, there was no name mentioned, but a 42-year-old man that was found at a bus shelter on Portage Avenue near Edmonton Street. When I read the CBC report, it was very, very, very short. I'd wished and hoped that I could read more on what happened. And this individual, this man, had a story. Remind each one of you that he had a story, he had a family, and he had a community that he came from. And so we want to acknowledge it's a huge loss today to hear that news. Aside from other news that's happening, that loss is way much stronger than when we lose an individual on our own lands. It truly means a lot to us. So I share that grief, and I share that pain and sadness with each one of you. And I pray that answers come, so that we can help the individuals that don't have any place to stay or live, and that are lost out there. So I want to open with a prayer, and I often pray to Creator and our grandfathers and our grandmothers in the four directions, and to Nokomis, Mother Earth, and to our spirit helpers. So, Bonjour, Tichmanto, Tijikishkoya, Danishnakas, Weweta, Koimakwanudam. I come to you in prayer today, Creator, grandfathers, grandmothers, Nokomis, and to my spirit helpers. I pray for the organizers that are leading this event. I pray that you honor the recipient that's going to be honored today, Harold Dyck. It's a great honor to be honoring him today. I ask the ancestors to continue to give him that support in his advocacy work, for anti-poverty, to fight that poverty is really hard on the spirit. So I ask that you take care of his spirit and continue to walk with him and on his journey. I pray for all the individuals, the leaders in the communities that are doing tremendous work for our inner city. I can't imagine how it must be. So I just pray that Creator and ancestors be with each one of you, just to bring that justice to the people, so that all people could be treated fair, equally, and the same, regardless of race or where they come from. So I say Chimigwech for to Creator and our ancestors for bringing us here, so that we can sit back and listen. I pray that each person listen with their heart and with their spirit, so that they can move forward to bring that change to humanity and to the people in the inner city of Winnipeg. Egose and Chimigwech. Thank you.
Miigwech Kramashingus for your words and your wisdom. This morning I got shivers. I think, It's been hard on all of our spirits this whole time, and your words are like a balm for me, I can say. So thank you, Miigwech. And thank you for all your activism in the community. I know you're very active, so it is very much appreciated. Yes, so we are going to turn to the Joseph Zuken Citizen Activist Award. And I'm just going to share an image here of Joseph Zuken. And this is an award given to individuals or groups that uphold Joe Zuken's values of serving community and working to build a better world. The award honors those who have made significant contributions in a variety of ways, including education, social policy, justice and law, and the arts. And many of you would know who Joe Zuken was, but I'll just talk about him briefly. He was one of Winnipeg's most effective and controversial politicians. He was born in the Ukraine in 1912, and his family moved to Canada in 1914, settling in Winnipeg's North End. He served for over 42 years as a school trustee and city councillor. For much of his political career, he was attacked for his radical ideas. But by the time he retired from public office, many of his proposals had become accepted, including kindergarten, free textbooks for school children, increased public housing, and urban development. He was instrumental in establishing the Seven Oaks General Hospital. And after he passed away in 1986, a memorial association was formed to support his legacy and recognize activists. And the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Manitoba is proud to now host the Joseph Zuken Citizen Activist Award that we do every year now with the State of the Inner City launch. This year, we are very pleased to be honoring Harold Dyck with the Joseph Zuken Activist Award. I first had the pleasure of meeting Harold through the work of Make Poverty History Manitoba and know him to be a very knowledgeable, fierce, and effective advocate for those experiencing poverty. Harold is being honored today for his lifelong work and dedication to ending poverty. And we will get to hear from Harold shortly. But first, I'm going to introduce Myron May, who will speak to Harold's accomplishments. Myron is with the Workers Organizing Resource Center and a co-worker of Harold's.
Yes, and thank you. I'm Myron May, and thank you for the introduction. I will tell you I'm not the only person that nominated Harold Dyck for this very prestigious award, the Joe Zuken Citizen Activist Award. So the following words will be more of a collaboration between myself and David Northcott, who Harold worked with at Winnipeg Harvest for many years. As a lifelong community and union activist, Harold has committed his time and energy to teaching, advocating for social justice policy changes, and supporting legal challenges for fair and just access to a welfare system that is the key support for low-income families, as well as having time for individual advocacy support for a person fighting for basic needs. Harold has been and still is active in individual advocating and engaging the poverty and injustice of social programs that hurt families in Winnipeg. He was a founder of the Manitoba Low Income Intermediary Project and has dedicated the past 22 years to provide very effective anti-poverty and welfare advocacy, and rarely receiving an income above the poverty line. He played a valuable role as part of Winnipeg Harvest's involvement in anti-poverty work, including research, education, policy development, and public information. He has taught and trained hundreds of Manitobans in poverty advocacy through really in-depth courses in volunteer mentoring. He's been involved in almost every anti-poverty organization and campaign in Winnipeg over the past few decades. And those include, and he's been part of many social justice and community organizations, including the Social Planning Council, the Spence Neighborhood Association, the Property Advisory Committee, Resource Assistance for Youth, Community Unemployed Help Center, Advisory Committee to the Minister of Residential Tenancies Act, and of course, Make Poverty History Manitoba, just to name a few. In addition to that, Harold has taken a crack at running for public office. He has also been a staunch and active union member for many, many, many years. He led the organizing drive for the first contract strike at Boeing Aircraft. He was also a member of MGEU, the Manitoba Government Employees Union, and was also as a safety and health officer for the province. And also he was a proud member of CAW during the time of the organizing drive. Also, in addition to all of this, I don't know how he packs all of this stuff into a lifetime, but he was also part of refugee support organizations, the peace movement. In addition, the Winnipeg Labor Council, he was a member and also chaired many committees as well. But I'm glad, and I was struck by Grandma Shingoose's reference to the spirit, to blessing Harold's spirit, because the kind of work that Harold does is very, very difficult. He's on the front lines and in the trenches, and he's face to face with desperation and pain and despair. And as an advocate, a lot of times you absorb those emotions, and the light that you have, the spirit that you have, sometimes flickers and sometimes dims, but then it comes back brighter. And I've seen that working, in an office adjacent to Harold's. The compassion that he shows and the understanding and the displaying of dignity to people that really, really are at the end of the line. And when Harold is doing his advocacy work, what he provides in addition to the assistance and the help is hope. And all of the clients that end up leaving leave with hope. And so I know Harold has paid, a tremendous price, as advocates do. But he's made his investment and commitment to his community, and more importantly, the people in it. And he has made that agreement within himself. And it's truly, truly admirable what he's done in a lifetime. So if anyone on this planet deserves an award such as the Joe Zuken Award, it is Harold Dyck. So to you, my brother, thank you very much for your contributions above and beyond, and on your recognition, finally, for your social justice and community activist work. Congratulations, Harold.
Yes, congratulations. We're all giving you virtual applause. There's some wonderful comments in the chat, Harold, that I hope that you can see. Oh, there's your award. Fantastic. Yeah, Karen Schlichting dropped that off earlier, and we have a nice photo of you with the award as well. So Harold, yeah, we have about 8 minutes to hear from you. Are you, yeah, please share your thoughts.
Okay, 8 minutes. Karen told me 3 hours. I'll try to cut out a little bit of my thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for this reward. Very heartfelt gratitude. There's not many of us left around, but I knew Joe. I knew him for many years, up to his death in 1986, as Molly had mentioned earlier. And he was one of a number of people I had met over the years that I took guidance and inspiration from. And perhaps in my own inadequate way, I tried to continue the kind of legacy he left in the community. And that's been pretty much my whole life of fighting for justice. When I see something wrong, I'm the kind of person that just can't let it slide, can't let it stand by the wayside, that I've always been motivated to try and right the wrongs in our world. And there's just way too many of them. But I try and make the best contribution I can in my little corner of the world here. I would like to state too that one of the things that's inspired me is that my son and my daughter, who is now living in and joining us from New York City, are here today. And one of the great inspirations in my life is this driving desire to make them, leave them a world a little bit better than the one I arrived in. So there's so many people that inspired and guided my life that I just don't know how to thank them. I wouldn't be here today with all that they have given me. The one thing I will say as well about Joe is that, as I said, there were not many of us left that knew him, perhaps even fewer that were able to address him as comrade with the capital C, and if you get my drift. And we did work very closely together. I don't know how I managed to do all the things I did. As Myron mentioned, I tried to apply to the powers that be to get cloned to manage the workload, but they said one of me was too many already. So just keep trucking along. But in terms of just my ongoing involvement in this very troubled world right now, I remember when I turned 60, and I'm going to be turning 70 this summer. My son asked me if I was starting to feel old yet. And I thought about that for a minute, and I said, you know what, not really. I think you only start feeling old when you spend more time looking behind at what you did rather than ahead at what you're going to do. And my life is still very much centered on things that I want to do, plan to do, rather than the things I have done. But I appreciate this award as something that gives me a positive reinforcement that I've done some things in my life that are worthy of recognition. And with the name of Joe Zuken attached, it is something that I value very highly. I'm not normally one that seeks or cares about awards of any kind, but this one I do greatly value. There can be other awards that you receive though, and I have received over the years that I've worked, and I could tell so many stories about those kinds of things. They're less tangible. They're not going to make the media or get a lot of public attention. One of those many stories that sticks out in my mind that helped sustain me in all these years and sacrifices I made was a woman who came into our office who was having a problem with welfare, and I was able to resolve those issues for her. She was a residential school survivor, and I listened to all the horror stories of what she went through. And I heard those kinds of stories way too many times. One of those things that just makes you so angry that you have to do something. And after solving the problems, we said goodbye, and I didn't see her for another 3-4 years. Then I ran into her on the bus one day, and she was so excited to see me and wanted to talk to me. We sat down and talked, and she said, yeah, after I had solved those issues for her, she had a complete change of attitude in life. When I first met her, she had this beaten look in her eyes, like she had given up on life, that there was no future. She told me that I had inspired her so much because I asked nothing in return. I was just there to help her. And I did everything I could with success, that she decided she wanted to be like that as well. And she went out and got a certificate as a nurse's aide and was now working as a nurse's aide. And she wanted to thank me for that. That is a kind of reward that money cannot replace. And it's the kind of things I heard over the years that makes everything worthwhile for me. I wouldn't recommend my career path and choices to anybody that's looking to make lots of money, but it sure gives you a hell of a lot of self-satisfaction in the things you want to do. Now, I have to say in all honesty that 22 years, as mentioned, that I've done the one-on-one advocacy, I've had to curtail that a lot in the past year. It's worn me out, to be honest. I just can't handle what I used to. Age, my brain may still think young. The rest of my body may not be in full agreement with that. but I still plug away the best I can. But at the end, I'm going to mention briefly a new initiative when I keep talking about looking to the future that I'm working on undertaking now that I hope is going to make a significant difference in Manitoba. I know we're running out of time here, and I wish I could spend more time just talking about things. And it's unfortunate that we have to do this in this current environment on Zoom because we can't hang around, have a coffee or tea and some snacks and talk a lot more and exchange experiences. But be as it may, here we are. And again, thank you. And I kind of want to leave with some quotes that have inspired me over the years. And I hope in sharing with you that to help sustain you all in your future careers and efforts to make this a better world through organizations like the CCPA, who can play such a vital role in these crazy times we're going through. Definitely one, many of you may have heard this, words of Henry David Thoreau. I've chosen a path in life that a lot of people wouldn't, and I'm satisfied with that path. And it always came to my mind his words that if a person chooses, or those who choose, if a person doesn't keep pace with their companions, perhaps it is because they hear a different drummer. Let them step to the music which they hear, however measured or far away. Yeah, I dance to my drummer. I'm satisfied with the choices I made. And each of you make your choices and dance to your drummer. But as long as that drummer is leading you to fight for a better world, then keep up the good fight. Another one, and I could cite so many, is Jose Marti, a great Cuban leader, who very briefly stated, "With the poor people of this earth, I choose to share my fate." Okay, that's a choice he made. And finally, something I always put up on my door or office wall: injustice in this world will not be destroyed until those who are unaffected by it are as outraged as those who are. And it's an inspiration. When you see injustice, it doesn't matter whether it involves you personally, it's imperative that you stand up against it to make this a better world. I referred briefly earlier to that discussion I had with my son, and I think it's the way I look at things now. I know I have more years behind me than ahead of me. I know when I was young, I was full of, as the old saying goes, piss and vinegar, that I was going to change the world. When it comes a time to write my epitaph, I may not have changed the world, but I would be satisfied with the following words. He may not have changed the world, but at least he made it a little bit better for a lot of people. If we could all claim that, this would indeed be a better world. So I hope that you're all inspired to proceed. And finally, just that brief announcement I wanted to make. For the past several months, and I've had some wonderful summer students working with me, we're creating a province-wide anti-poverty website. It's going to be named Maple 21, when the date we registered it. We registered it last year. It is online now, but we're not advertising it to the general public yet. It still needs some content building, but I do invite you to look at it. That's simply mapo21.ca, and we welcome any positive feedback and input in that regard. And our hope is to make it a central tool for anti-poverty advocates, for education and training, exchange of information, keeping people up to date, and a linkage point for all the various groups and organizations that are fighting poverty in the community. And I look very much forward to continuing working with all of you in developing that and so many other efforts that could reduce poverty in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and our whole world. So thank you again so much. This honor from people who I respect And it does help sustain me in continuing the things I want to do in my life. Thanks again, Molly, the board, and nominators and so on. And keep up the struggle.
Thank you, Harold. Wow, I'm getting shivers over Zoom today. Such wonderful words of wisdom, and you're still starting new initiatives. We have to keep going, of course, to advocate for and stand with people who are struggling with poverty and all the challenges therein. So there's some more wonderful comments in the chat for you to read, Harold. I think we can save the chat actually, so you can see those afterwards as well. I'm so glad that your son could join and watch us from New York. That's fantastic. One of the bonuses of doing this online. So yeah, if you're just joining us here, we are honoring Harold Dyck, the Joseph Zuken Citizen Activist Award winner this year, who has worked a lifetime of standing with people experiencing poverty, advocating for what they have a right to within the EIA system, teaching EIA advocacy to others, creating resources and advocating for social change, among many other things there. So yeah, thank you so much, Harold. Now we're going to turn our agenda over to the launch of the State of the Inner City report. We have 132 people here as attendees. Thank you so much for being here with us. We have some wonderful presenters and panelists yet to come. So if you're just joining us, we did start off with the Joseph Zuken Activist Award here, and we were very fortunate to have a blessing by Grandma Shingoose, who helped us start off in a very good way this morning. And we will be launching the State of the Inner City report, which is an annual research collaboration between community-based organizations based in Winnipeg's inner city and our office, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Manitoba. We are a nonprofit, independent charitable research institute that has a focus on community-based research. The report is peer-reviewed and is guided by the community-based organizations themselves. We met several times with organizations to determine the focus of this year, as we do every year, the report and what would be in the report this year. I want to give a huge thank you to all those organizations who participated along the way. I know people are busy, it's challenging times, but we do really appreciate and value your time. Also, there was interviews, particularly with Owen's report that we'll be talking about. So thank you to all who participated. A big thank you to our funder, the United Way of Winnipeg, and the Manitoba Research Alliance via the Social Sciences Humanities Research Council and the Jubilee Fund. And also to all of the supporters of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Manitoba, the labour movement, individual organizations and individuals. I know we have many supporters here today, so thank you so much. I also, while I'm thanking people, want to thank Andre Forêt, who is our tech behind here, our event, and to Karen Schlichting, our office manager, for all their work on this project. So we know there is racialized and spatially concentrated poverty in Winnipeg's inner city. That's been the case for a very long time. And we've seen that COVID has hit neighborhoods hard. And Winnipeg's inner city was hit hard with higher case counts and deaths due to COVID because of vulnerabilities due to poverty. And so any recovery from COVID must address the vulnerability for inner city residents. Sarah Cooper had a very good op-ed in the Free Press today that said, we can't go back to normal. Normal wasn't working. And so this report, placing community at the heart of the recovery from COVID, finds that governments must stop manufacturing vulnerability in Winnipeg's core neighborhoods through a lack of investment and resources. And we want governments to work with community on a just recovery from COVID that addresses not just the crisis created by the pandemic, but the root causes, the socioeconomic inequalities, and also helps prepare for what we know is coming in terms of climate change, hopefully preventing it, but also dealing with it. So the report today has three parts. Two are newly released today, and I'll be talking about those in a moment. Just to note, we are republishing a report that we launched in the summer called Building Sustainable Communities Program by Shauna McKinnon that describes the changing funding environment from the province of Manitoba. It was related to the topic, so we did include it in this year's report. So our program today is that we are very lucky to have a video summarizing the report for one of the first times. We worked with Just TV out of the Broadway Neighborhood Center, which is a social enterprise on this video. So I'll introduce that shortly. Then we are going to hear from Sarah Cooper, Lila Asher, and Kayla Villebrun-Normand on their paper titled First Steps Towards a Just Recovery. Then we will hear from Owen Taves on his paper, What's Going On with Portage Place. And then we will have a panel of community leaders to discuss. We have Gololcha Boru, an advocate for the newcomer community and children and youth. Claire Friesen, activist and artist who works in community-based organizations in the inner city. And David Morrison, the executive director of Thunderbird House. And then after that, we will have time for questions and discussion. I note there is a Q&A function here in this Zoom webinar. So if you can remember to put questions in the Q&A, and we will draw questions from there. If they're in the chat, we will pull them from the chat, but we're trying to keep the chat for the chat and the Q&A for the Q&A, and to, of course, keep comments and questions respectful. It is Pink Shirt Day, after all, a day to raise awareness about bullying. So we, of course, want to create a safe space here and keep all comments respectful. So Andre, yeah, hopefully you're queuing up the video here. This is the world premiere of the State of the Inner City video. We're grateful to everyone involved, those in the video, and the folks who put the video together. So here's the video.
COVID has hit Winnipeg's inner city hard. Climate extremes are on the rise and people are being left behind. Recovering from and being prepared for crises are also opportunities to create a more just and equal city. A just recovery for Winnipeg's inner city means that any plan for its future must hold residents' well-being and the community's priorities at heart. That means good housing, food security, education and jobs, healthcare, justice and safety, a healthy environment, community, and connection. Winnipeg's inner city is home to nearly 128,000 residents. There are so many positive strengths to build on. It is beautiful and vibrant, the city's cultural hub full of public art, architecture, schools, and an amazing number of community organizations serving the community. But there are real needs that have to be addressed. 30% of households fall below the low-income poverty line. 39% of renter households are in core housing need, and a large share of households are food insecure. There are many more compounding problems that create vulnerability. These issues are too big for one person or family to take on alone. Upholding human rights to housing, food, and health requires systemic changes at the community level so that we can better weather storms together to build community resilience. How can we build community resilience? Through intentional public investment. It's been tried before.
Winnipeg has a long history of tri-level funding agreements, but a lot of people don't know about them. When people don't have access to affordable, good quality housing, to good jobs, to resources like daycares, to good quality food, good health care, and so on, a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic is going to have a bigger impact.
Portage Place, the Forks. Have you ever wondered how and why these places came to be? They were funded in the 1980s through tri-level urban development agreements where funding and community planning decisions were made together by municipal, provincial, and federal governments, in big part to reduce urban poverty and revive declining neighborhoods. Governments worked together and it held promise, but it wasn't perfect. Instead of funding infrastructure for people, these agreements mainly funded infrastructure for private business with some promise that benefits would trickle down, but it wasn't enough. The focus on building those buildings was done without a crucial player that should have been right at the heart of this plan, the community itself. Fast forward 40 years and some of the same issues remain. Winnipeg's downtown and inner city need big investments in training and jobs, housing, recreational opportunities, and meeting spaces. We need room for projects that bring to life the visions of organizations and people in the inner city. It's time for a new funding agreement, one that puts community at the heart for the inner city to thrive.
We can reimagine what happens with Portage Place and all of the possible employment opportunities if we build relationships with the residents of this area, learn about all of the skills that they currently have, and design a Portage Place of the future with those skills, abilities, and talents in mind.
My connection with Portage Place is I bought my first tracksuit here, and I work at the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization of Manitoba.
I think one of my most memorable experiences here at Portage Place was at the beginning of Idle No More, where we had a flash mob round dance here, and we made a statement as Indigenous peoples during the Christmas holiday season to say that we will not be ignored and our relationship to this place will not be forgotten. And from that moment that Idle No More had its first round dance here, I felt such an attachment.
In 1987, Portage Place was thought to be key to creating a thriving downtown. The shops lining north of Portage Avenue were annexed, the land retained by government, and an urban mall was built, funded by 45 million public dollars.
Portage Place was built because of two of those urban development agreements, but the success of the retail, movies, housing, and multipurpose space fell short of the promises.
While its use has changed with time, one thing has stayed constant: its role as a public gathering space.
Portage Place is a community asset. It's a space for traditions of visiting, resistance, and creativity. After all, it was built on Indigenous land.
The neighborhoods that surround the mall are those where immigrants and refugees often settle in Winnipeg, like myself. It is a meeting place for people from all communities. The Portage Place community has the vision and the capacity to turn the mall into a hub that meets the need of the neighborhood. It's not about business, it's about people.
After all we've been through, can't we agree? A just recovery from COVID-19 should shape how we reimagine Portage Place.
In terms of the potential for Portage Place, I think we're at a moment in time where we could really look at what we could do with such a big space in the inner city for community development.
Portage Place and other big places like the vacant Hudson Bay, the rail yards, emptied office buildings downtown. These are opportunities for downtown and inner city Winnipeg to reimagine our future. One that puts the community at the heart of everything. One that puts equity first. Community priorities are clear, and there is so much more work to do. Community-based and social purpose organizations are well placed to address these. They're innovative and collaborative. These organizations deserve a seat at the planning table. Maybe they should be designing the entire table. And they need adequate funding to be there. If history has taught us anything, it's that trying to address complicated local issues without our community experts is a recipe for failure. Attention to the social determinants of health, intersectionality and equity, and Indigenous self-determination are essential components of an equitable and inclusive community, a truly just recovery. Let's dream these concepts into action together.
Thank you so much for that video, Just TV, and to everyone who was in the video. You note our report is there at the end, and I also want to note the beautiful art on the cover of the report this year is from Jackie Travers. Thank you so much, Jackie, for permission to use that art. It is also going to be, or I think it already is, on the outside of the Red River College downtown campus building there. It was inspired by the land underneath Portage Place. And Jackie is in Owen's report as somebody who's been involved in that community for a long time before Portage Place was built. So it's a really wonderful connection to have her beautiful art on the cover there. Yeah, a note, we will have time for questions after the presentation, so please put questions in the chat there. Before I introduce our first speaker, I did want to acknowledge we have political representatives with us here today. We have Leah Gizan, Malaya Marcelino, Marcus Chambers, Ross Eady, and Vivian Santos. If I missed anyone, please introduce yourself in the chat as a political representative. I did take a scan, but I might have missed someone. We're very grateful for you to be here today. And also we will, of course, be following up this report by sending it to all relevant political representatives. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker here, Sarah Cooper. Sarah is an assistant professor in the Department of City Planning at the University of Manitoba and a Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Research Associate, and she will be introducing the others who worked on the report with her.
Great, thank you, Molly. And thank you everyone else for being here today. It's great to see so many people out here. Chimigwech also to Grandma Shingus for the opening. I really appreciated your words and the reminder that the real world. The two other authors of this report are Lila Asher, who is a graduate student in city planning at the U of M, and also Kayla Villebrun-Normand, who is Métis from the homeland of the Métis Nation and a graduate student in community health sciences at U of M. So last year's State of the Inner City report looked at the impacts of COVID's first wave on the inner city. And it found that although community-based organizations immediately pivoted to finding new ways of supporting community, a consistent lack of government attention to the social determinants of health before the pandemic hit resulted in greater social and economic marginalization in the inner city, and thus resulted in an increased vulnerability to COVID-19, as well as to other potential crises. Next slide, please. So this year we asked, how can we move beyond the pandemic? So the Council of Canadians has identified 6 key principles to frame a just recovery. These are putting people's health and well-being first, strengthening the social safety net, providing relief directly to people, prioritizing the needs of workers and communities, building resilience to prevent future crises, building solidarity and equity across communities, generations, and borders, and upholding Indigenous rights and working in partnership with Indigenous peoples. So we took these principles as a starting point and asked, what would a just recovery look like for the inner city? So to answer this question, we examine the priorities that are evident in the work that community-based organizations do every day and the history of government funding in the inner city. And Lila and Kayla are going to talk about these 2 parts of the research, starting with Lila.
Hi. So since the pandemic is still ongoing, it wasn't safe to conduct a full consultation with community-based organizations, or CBOs. So to start the conversation about what a just recovery could mean for Winnipeg's inner city, we analyzed published documents from 79 organizations to find out what themes and priorities they have in common. We found 3 main themes that run through their work. The first is Indigenous self-determination. Indigenous-led community-based organizations build on a long legacy of self-determination and community to provide services that address the needs of Indigenous residents of the inner city and that center Indigenous values. Others also focus on respecting Indigenous rights and tailor their programs to Indigenous communities. The second theme is intersectional equity. Organizations have programs for people with different identities, sometimes getting quite specific in who they serve. These targeted programs help catch people who would otherwise have a hard time accessing what they need due to the ways that colonialism, capitalism, racism, and sexism overlap to leave gaps in other services. The third theme is attention to the social determinants of health. Most community programs fit into these 7 focus areas: housing, food security, education and employment, healthcare, justice and safety, the built environment, and support and connections. Whether or not people have access to basic needs across these focus areas can have a serious impact on their health, and the areas are interconnected in complex ways. From this analysis of the reports of community-based organizations, we see that the three themes of Indigenous self-determination, intersectional equity, and the social determinants of health are specific to the context of inner city Winnipeg. These themes also have broader relevance to community resilience and to a just recovery across Canada, as seen in the work of other scholars and community practitioners. I'll now turn it over to Kayla to talk about funding.
Thanks, Lila. So to support a just recovery in the inner city, we need money. So in Winnipeg, there has been a variety of funding strategies that have been used to address the poverty and related issues in the inner city. In the 1960s, we had the urban renewal. In the 1970s, we had the neighborhood improvement program. And so at the time, these were really well-intended strategies, but they did really focus on infrastructure and physical features and wasn't really getting to the root of the problem yet. Then it was in the 1980s where urban development agreements, or better known as tri-level agreements, where the scope and breadth of healing the inner city as a whole really came to light. So the tri-level agreements was launched as a way to tackle longstanding and intersecting social and economic problems in the inner city. So it reached beyond just the physical aspects. The interesting thing about tri-level agreements is that each level of government, that being municipal, provincial, and federal, had an equal stake in the decision-making and the funding being provided. In Winnipeg, we had the Core Area Initiative 1 and 2, and that was in the 1980s. So as much as the Core Area Initiatives 1 and 2 took into account social and economic issues in the inner city, it still fell short and emphasized brick and mortar developments more than social issues. But it did show that collaboration with all three levels was possible. The tri-level model also allowed senior governments to spend their money more efficiently and with greater impact. And for provincial and municipal governments, it provided resources that were desperately needed to programs where the impact could be 8 to 10 times larger than what could have been done alone. Also, the tri-level funding agreements provided funding and support for grassroots community movements, which turned into networks of community-based organizations operating in the inner city today. Later tri-level agreements and provincial funding through Neighborhoods Alive and the Winnipeg Regeneration Strategy strengthened those inner city organizations and provided policy support to address social and economic issues. The focus on the inner city and partnerships with community-based organizations made it possible to develop locally relevant programs, resources, and strategies to address complex spatialized poverty. So all that to say is that the next investment should be large scale, geographically targeted to the inner city, and developed with and guided by inner city communities.
Thanks, Kayla. So if you're interested in knowing more about how funding for inner city neighborhoods has changed in the last couple of years, Shauna McKinnon has written a report about the Building Sustainable Communities program, and that's chapter 2 in this year's State of the Inner City report. The next few years offer the opportunity to increase community resilience in Winnipeg's inner city for at least 3 reasons. First, at the beginning of the pandemic, governments found all kinds of money to address the crisis. This shows that if there's political will, anything is possible. Second, momentum is building to address inequality, climate change, and ongoing colonialism. There is increasing awareness of these issues among the general public and recognition that we cannot solve one problem without also addressing the others. Third, governments are developing plans to move towards a just recovery phase from the pandemic. This is an opportunity to shape those plans towards just outcomes. And it's especially important to keep a focus on justice in the recovery because of the risk of austerity policies being pushed forward while the public is distracted by the ongoing crisis.
We've identified 3 steps that will move towards a just recovery. The first is engagement of inner city communities to identify their priorities arising from for a just recovery. This year's research identified priorities arising from the work of community-based organizations, but there are other priorities. Are there other priorities that we should include? For example, one gap in the research is that Inuit organizations were not included in our analysis. And so we could look at what Inuit community priorities might be for a just recovery. The second step in this process is for federal, provincial, and municipal governments to provide financial and other resources to support the work already underway. As you heard today, past experience has shown that tri-level agreements can work as a way to leverage resources. However, such agreements must have a fourth level of community leadership and accountability. A just plan for the inner city must keep the community's priorities at its heart and will require community representation at all levels of decision-making in relation to planning and funding. In particular, reconciliation requires resources and funding at the community level to ensure that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit priorities and self-determination are elevated and addressed. Finally, it is important to note that there are limits to what community-based organizations or funding alone can achieve. The government's failure to provide for basic needs through adequate social assistance, healthcare, education, and social housing, and the failures of the child welfare and justice system cannot be remedied at the community level. They must be dealt with through public policy at a government program level. Changes to these policies and structures from all levels of government, as well as from civil society, are needed to make a truly just recovery possible. These three steps offer a starting point for a just recovery, as well as a way to build resilience for the inevitable future pandemics, climate change, and other potential crises. Planning for the long-term well-being of inner city communities by members of those inner city communities is key to the work ahead, and now is a good time to do this work.
That is our report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah Cooper, who is with City Planning at the University of Manitoba. Lila Asher is a master's student in City Planning at the University of Manitoba, and Kayla Villebrun-Normand is doing a master's in community health sciences at the University of Manitoba. So we're very fortunate that this team did all of this work. And I should note this is phase one of their work. We can talk a little bit more about that later, but we are planning on doing a phase two to talk about what implementing a just recovery could look like through more engagement with community-based organizations. I did want to note there was one more elected representative who introduced themselves in the chat, Matt Weeb. Thank you so much for doing that, and glad you could be here today. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Owen Taves. Owen received his PhD in geography from City University of New York and is an award-winning author of Stolen City, Racial Capitalism and the Making of Winnipeg. Descended from Russian Mennonites, he lives in the west end of Winnipeg and is a member of the abolitionist prisoner solidarity organization Bar None and the anti-austerity coalition Budget for All. And Owen has written What's Going On with Portage Place. So take it away, Owen.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks, everyone, for all your words today. This is a lovely event, and I feel grateful to be part of it. And thanks, everyone, for coming. So I wrote this chapter about Portage Place primarily for people who care about Portage Place and want to contribute to a community-based vision for it, but aren't sure what has already happened and where things stand now. I think there's a lot of confusion and uncertainty about what's going on. So I hope that this will be a contribution to getting everyone caught up and on the same page so that we can make some things happen at Portage Place. So, and there's two sections of the chapter that I wrote that are, it became quite long, but two sections in particular, I think will be most immediately useful to community leaders and helpers and activists. And the first is called the Starlight Threat, and that details what's happened since Forks North Portage Partnership brought Starlight to town in 2019. And then the section, Where Do Things Stand Now, kind of summarizes some of the challenges and opportunities and the conditions that we currently find ourselves in. The bulk of the chapter is based on 13 telephone interviews I did in November and December. Interlocutors were selected for their involvement in different phases of community resistance to Portage Place. Sorry, community resistance of the sale of Portage Place to Starlight. And or for their involvement in the Portage Place community. Sorry, I'm just setting a timer here so that I don't go over my 15 minutes. So I want to say something quickly about the history of Portage Place because I think it's really important. Portage Place is only 35 years old, right? But we tend to, I think it was Dion Brand who said that cities are forgetful, right? We tend to forget how the environment around us has come to be. So, and also, that's why, I mean, the Joe Zuken Award is such an important institution, because it's an opportunity for us to celebrate our history as activists and community organizers, and to make sure that those histories continue into the present. So Portage Place probably has the most unique history of any shopping mall possibly in North America, right? Its origins are in the Inner City Committee for Rail Relocation that was fighting an overpass that was going to destroy a lot of community spaces between Furby and Sherbrooke in the Logan and West Alexander and Centennial neighborhoods. So just in short, that movement proposed that instead of spending all this money on overpasses and underpasses to get commuters from the city center to the suburbs over the rail yards, the city could move the rail yards and use that money and the rail yard land for things that the inner city communities and residents actually need, like affordable housing, youth recreation space, women's centers, community clinics, et cetera, right? We all know these things that we need, that people have been demanding for decades and decades. So, and I just wanted to sort of shout out some of the organizations that were part of that movement, which include CEDA, Rossbrook House, Indian Métis Friendship Center, and individuals such as Sister McNamara, Cyril Keeper, Greg Sellinger, and people like that. That movement came out of a really strong community development scene in the late 1970s. So what happened was, out of that movement came the Core Area Initiative, that we've already sort of seen the history of through the video and the last presentation. The Core Area Initiative put $45 million in 2021 dollars into building Portage Place. And the link is that Lloyd Axworthy, the Liberal MP from Winnipeg, created the Core Area Initiative, secured the federal money that got the other levels of government to pitch in as well. And he specifically cited the rail relocation movement as the impetus for the Core Area Initiative. But instead of focusing on the things that the rail relocation movement demanded, and the inner city communities that were part of it were demanding, a lot of money went to shopping malls, specifically Portage Place and the Forks, right? So anyway, I just wanted to really highlight that $45 million, because that's the public money that was put into Portage Place, and that remains in Portage Place in the form of the public ownership of the land and the parking garage under Portage Place, which is publicly owned by the Forks North Portage Partnership, which is controlled by the 3 levels of government. So since Portage Place has been since Portage Place merged with the Forks to form the Forks North Portage Partnership, the Forks North Portage Partnership has been extracting approximately $5 million per year in parking revenues and ground rents out of the Portage Place neighborhood, and putting it into the Forks. And the Forks North Portage Partnership favors the Forks almost exclusively over Portage Place. It does very little to invest in Portage Place. So this brings us to the Starlight years of the Starlight debacle, where in 2015, the corporate owner of the mall itself, of the building, Vancouver-based Peterson Group, admitted that it had stopped investing in Portage Place, wanted to sell it and to find a buyer, wanted the Forks North Portage Partnership to bundle the land and the parking garage with the building, because large real estate developers, they had found across the country, seemed to value the land and the parking lots beneath Portage Place much more than the mall itself, which is actually kind of an ominous sign for the community that values the mall as a gathering place and a place to access basic necessities. So soon after that, the Forks North Portage Partnership did indeed begin to offer Portage Place along with the land and underground parking for sale to big firms across the country. And that's when in 2019, they found a potential buyer in Starlight Acquisitions, which is a large billionaire real estate firm notorious for displacing Black communities and migrant and refugee communities in Ottawa and elsewhere. Because Forks North Portage Partnership had to get the 3 levels of government to sign off on the sale, there was an opportunity for community resistance. And the community resistance was quite fierce and quite immediate. Community leaders insisted that the community in and around Portage Place has to have a say in the government's decisions about the mall's future. They first made statements opposing the sale at a meeting of the Central Park Stewardship Committee that the Forks North Portage Partnership is on. Then at City Hall, when City Council unanimously approved the sale, and then in 2 subsequent coalitions, first the Portage Place Community Coalition, and then the Portage Place Community Voices Committee. And inner city community organizations that were involved include the Central Neighborhoods Community Development Corporation, Social Planning Council of Winnipeg, Spence Neighborhood Association, Fearless R2W, Mosaic Newcomer Services, and Knox United Church, among others. So there were many requests for funding from Starlight of the various levels of government. I'm going to sort of fast forward over that, to which the city and the province gave into and the federal government did not. And then last fall, in September, Starlight dropped out of their proposed purchase of Portage Place after the federal government did not give in to its request for $50 million in grants and $240 million in loans. So I want to now summarize where things stand now. So one of I think the welcome unintended effects of Forks North Portage Partnership's attempt Starlight was that through these coalitions and presentations at City Hall, inner city community leaders developed the broad outlines of a community vision for Portage Place that consists of 4 key pillars. And those are, first, that Portage Place should become a nonprofit community center that may include for-profit stores offering affordable necessities as determined by the community. And it should serve primarily people in the neighborhood rather than being a corporate shopping mall aspiring to serve Winnipeg Jets ticket holders. 2, hundreds of new rent geared to income social housing units should be built at Portage Place. 3, a real safety plan that centers Indigenous women and girls should replace the current security approach. And 4, Indigenous people should own Portage Place. So these 4 pillars, inner city community leaders recognize can be used to develop a counter proposal for various communities and organizations that care about Portage Place to rally around and find funding for. As such, there's no need for any further open-ended community consultation. These 4 priorities are clear, and we can move forward now after 2.5 years of developing them. And on that note, I just wanted to actually quickly read a quote from 1978 from Victor Pierre, who was at the time the acting vice president of the Indian Brotherhood, the forerunner to the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. So this was after this is what Victor Pierre said after a particularly offensive city planning report about Winnipeg's inner city in 1978, 44 years ago. So, and he was quoted in the Winnipeg Free Press. Victor Pierre, acting vice president of the Indian Brotherhood, said he's, quote, sick and tired of the endless number of surveys which are conducted into the inner city problem. He said the Indian people have drawn up their own proposals, such as the 3-year-old Neeganon report, which recommends solutions to the problem. Rather than conducting more studies as the development plan review recommends, it is essential to provide decent housing immediately for all those in need in the inner city, he said, end quote. So this idea that there's no need to do these endless consultations about what people in the inner city need has been around for a long time. And that's what I heard from the community leaders that I spoke to about Portage Place. So Portage Place, the other thing that people talk to me about, the opportunities that Portage Place presents to people in Winnipeg, is that it's an excellent opportunity now that Starlight's gone to fight for something rather than against something, right? To work on something that's positive and energizing. It may also be an opportunity to establish new spaces for collaboration. new lines of communication and even feelings of identification between like-minded but not very well-connected groups in the city. So one of the key sort of lines of communication that people talk to me about needing to reestablish or strengthen are the lines of communication between urban activists, Indigenous community leaders in the city, and sort of high-level First Nations leaders. So at organizations like the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, Treaty 1 Development Corporation, or First Nations chiefs themselves. And I'll get to this a little bit later about how this specifically comes into play at Portage Place. But other relationships that, you know, community action around Portage Place might be able to foster and strengthen would be also relationships between Indigenous peoples and migrants and refugees, because those relationships, people, you know, people who are part of the Portage Place community told me are essential to the Portage Place community. And I think there's sort of a long-standing sense that that the need between those two communities in the city needs to be strengthened, and Portage Place could be a great opportunity to do that. There's also, of course, the need to strengthen connections between white activists and each of those groups in the city, and as well between community leaders at various organizations and the Portage Place community itself, the people who go to Portage Place every day and really identify with that space, and it forms a big part of their lives, to build the confidence of Portage Place regulars that they can have a say in the future of the mall. So 3 other things have transpired since 2019 that, in my view, make a community-based Portage Place appear realistic. First, the federal government, which owns the land jointly with the city and province, has acknowledged that it must consider its treaty obligations before selling its Portage Place assets. This means that a treaty land entitlement process like the one that led to the Treaty 1 Development Corporation's redevelopment of the Kapyong Barracks could be a possibility for Portage Place. Second, the city and province have shown their hand by offering a combined $49 million for the redevelopment of Portage Place to Starlight. What's more, the federal government did not actually reject out of hand Starlight's request for $50 million plus $250 million in loans, and have stated publicly that they continue to entertain the idea of offering that funding. So given that the mall was for sale, the mall itself, the building was for sale for only $23 million, a public purchase of Portage Place would seem to be easily accomplished. Third, the Hudson's Bay Company's downtown Winnipeg department store, which permanently closed in 2020 and is valued at exactly $0, is attached to Portage Place by a skywalk. Given that the bulk of the Hudson's Bay Company's wealth was stolen from Indigenous peoples by means of exploitative terms of trade, and a 7 million acre land grant from the British Empire made without the involvement of Indigenous peoples, the immense level of unmet need that exists in Winnipeg city center, and the stated willingness of the city and province to support its redevelopment, the Bay Building would make a logical component, and the Hudson's Bay Company would make a logical funder of an Indigenous-owned Portage Place Bay Building community center and housing complex. So I see I've only got a minute left, so I'm going to just leave it at that and look forward to the panel and discussion.
Thank you so much, Owen Taves, for that overview of your paper. Yeah, I encourage everyone, we'll put the link to the report in the chat. All the papers are excellent, and yeah, all those details Owen was describing are in the paper and the history there. So thank you so much, Owen, for that and for all your work on this. We are going to turn to our panel now, and the panel will do, their thoughts on what they've heard today and on a just recovery. So we have 3 panelists. We have Claire Therese Friesen, who is an artist, musician, facilitator, educator, community member, and labor activist. She's an auntie and bartender from Treaty 1. She's worked in various community organizations over 2 decades. So thanks so much for being here on our panel and for being in the video. We have David Morrison, who is currently the executive director of Thunderbird House. He worked with Manitoba government for 15 years in senior positions in justice and community services. And he worked in various US states before returning home to Winnipeg. And he is a volunteer in South Point Douglas for over 5 years. And there's no place he would rather be than South Point Douglas. I agree, a beautiful part of our community. Welcome, David. Thanks so much for being here. And we have Gololcha Boru, originally from Ethiopia, but grew up in Winnipeg. He's been an advocate in the newcomer community for the past decade as a voice for children and youth. While not busy fighting for community, he is coaching football for the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization of Manitoba, IRCOM, after-school program. And most recently, Gololcha was selected as 2020 United Nations People of African Descent Fellow, selected by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Congratulations. Currently, Gololcha works at the City of Winnipeg in the Community Development Division with Community Services. Thanks for being here with us, Gololcha. Yeah, so I'll just kick it off with just a very general question, and maybe you could just give your comments. We'll start with Claire, just in response to the report today and your thoughts on where we're at now and what's needed for a just recovery, or anything surprising that popped out to you and what you've heard so far today. It's a big question, but I'll start with you, Claire.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I feel so honored to be a part of this event. There's just so many amazing people that that come to the State of the Inner City Report events, and I feel very honored to be part of this panel. Yeah, there's so much in this report, and it was so wonderful to hear the authors share research. And I did kind of think about maybe what perspective I'd like to take as a panelist today. I do lots of things, as my bio suggests, and I guess I've really been thinking about myself as an artist and about artists in general throughout the pandemic, and also as we start to envision a just recovery. So yeah, and I just saw someone in the chat say something about Prairie Theatre Exchange, and I worked for 10 years at Portage Place Mall up in Prairie Theatre Exchange as an arts educator. And so I've spent lots of time in the mall, and I'm very, very excited about the idea of re-envisioning what that space can be and look like and feel like. I really loved something Michael said in the video about, like not just having a seat at the table, but designing the table. And so I guess I've just been giving kind of lots of thought to like, yeah, we do lots of really good research. We do lots of really good surveys. We found like really wonderful ways of like bringing community into that discussion, into the table. And maybe a piece that I'm really excited about seeing as we like move into this new phase is also an opportunity to do lots of the things that the report suggests, which is, including people's dreams, reimagining, bringing in creativity. And I think that that's sometimes a piece that we lack. We are often having to kind of respond to these very, very, colonial, oppressive systems, and we're putting these kind of band-aids or having to continually respond to those without a process where we actually get to sit around and reimagine. And I remember when I was working with youth in the North End and getting to be at some training where someone kind of reminded us that in order for young people to access their imagination, they have to feel safe. And I think that like I really hope that as we move forward, we do kind of create room for artists and for people to feel like they're not just responding to their current situation, but they actually get to like imagine, like access that imaginative brain and think about like, what could this be? How can we be? How can we live together and work together and gather together? And that beautiful example of the round dance at Portage Place Mall, that was a complete reimagining of what that space can feel like, can sound like. So yeah, maybe I'll just leave it there for now, just as kind of like my initial thoughts is just kind of also trying to bring in maybe a bit of an artistic artistic brain or an artistic lens to what is possible when we move forward, is that we don't just have to think about our current, we've done all the research, just like Owen was mentioning, you know, we have decades worth of research that tells us what we're doing wrong. And now we have this, hopefully we have this period of getting to reimagine together.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, that's fantastic. Really appreciate that. I'm going to turn to David Morrison with Thunderbird House, and we haven't had a chance to meet in person yet. And of course, Thunderbird House, we usually launch this report there, and it's talking about beauty and creativity. It's one of the most beautiful buildings in our city and was part of a large vision for that corner and neighborhood from the community that Owen mentioned. So David, yeah, can you share your thoughts in response to the report today?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Could you repeat the last part of that question? I'm sorry, I was.
Oh, yeah. Can you just share your thoughts in response to the report? And I was centering Thunderbird House in the part of Treaty 1 in Winnipeg, where there is a vision for the space around it for that neighborhood.
Oh, sure.
The Indigenous community did have and has had for many years.
Well, there, a lot of you know some of the history of Thunderbird House. It was conceived by elders and Mary Richard many years ago, and the spades hit the mud, I guess, in 2020. And this beautiful, incredible building designed by an architect named Cardinal was put up. And it's kind of a focal point for spirituality and for events. And there's everything there from wakes to feast to ceremony, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's been a real drawing place. It has never been well funded, and that's been one of its, it's never had sustained funding. It's had some funding. And somebody had earlier mentioned that reimagining anew, there isn't going to be going back to normal. When we got hit back, by COVID, maybe it was some sort of pause to say to us, sit at home and think about this for a while and how things can be reimagined. Because we went through perhaps the worst time in our lives, with the building being between things that were happening on the street vis-a-vis drugs and physical attacks on the building and so forth, made it look pretty banged up. Having said that, the interior is still that wonderful space and is still used by people for ceremony, and it's been various things over the last 2 years. For example, it's been a center for COVID testing and getting COVID shots, but it's been there a long time. Now, there's some really exciting things that are happening on the land. We entered into an agreement, and they entered into an agreement with us. Pamaway Ichita is building 22 units of housing for when I say on our property that they've leased, to work with people that are living on the street that may be addicted, et cetera, et cetera. There's an exclusion, like you have to be in there, and that's going to it's going to be a beautiful facility. It's going to have, you name it, a lodge. It's going to have fire. It's going to have a place for people to be rather than just sitting out on Main Street or in the bus shelter. And there's a strip, and I just call it the strip. If you go from the corner of the Disraeli down to Higgins, and I know it extends beyond that, where it looks very different than the other side of the street with its new buildings and so forth. And I looked at plans that were drawn up by the city and others, and I've seen the renderings and so forth, and it was to be as well kept and cared for as any part of the city. But for some reason, that never happened. There were never 3 sweat lodges put up, and it was sort of ignored. But having said that, now the property and our space, the city is, along with some funding from us, have put up a public washroom, which should be, there have been no facilities down there, if you can imagine. And that's just been horrible. There's no dignity, number one, sitting on the street, let alone trying to find some place to go to the bathroom. I'm sorry, but that's just the reality of it. Finding food, et cetera, et cetera. So public washroom is going to be there. It's going to be staffed with 2 people, and the hope is for 24 hours a day. And we're looking for a March opening on that. At the same time, we have the village that should be finished by the end of June. There have been a few delays, but that's going to add to the space also. Thunderbird House is undertaken. We're going to be doing community consultation. We had already done one. It's a bit dusty at this point because it's from about 2 years ago. Community consultation, questionnaires, and we'll be inviting people to join us. And so what do you vision for what is it that we should be doing? You know, I was challenged once in an interview. The only interview question was, what by the grace of God or this great spirit have you been charged to be? And that was it. I almost cried. I didn't, you know, you got 2 hours answer. And I think we really have to do that kind of thinking about what do we want it to be. There's tons of suggestion. It wasn't to be initially a place for you know, renting out office space. That was to be for elders and knowledge keepers and so forth. And so we want to get a whole lot busier in that. We're applying for grants. We've gotten some good support from foundations and so forth. The building is 20 plus years old, and some of the things do need to be repaired, notwithstanding the fact that windows and copper from the roof need to be taken into account. We have an accounting firm, an architectural firm that is working in collaboration with Mama Way and others in terms of how we pull all that space together. We don't look like the Balkans, you know, if I can use that, where they're doing their thing and they have their look and we have our look and none of it's together. A lot of that has been facilitated by WIAC, the Winnipeg Indigenous Executive Council, mainly Damon Johnson and so forth, and pulling us together in terms of let's talk, let's share. Like I learned a ton of stuff here today and I'm going, why isn't this in the news more? You know, I mean, I know why don't we hear about what some of the alternatives are? How can we hold hands? How can we cooperate? And I like Michael Champagne's, why don't we design the damn table? You know, I often said, you know, people talk about, you know, well, politicians decide the size of the pie. And I said, why don't we decide the size of the pie, or at least what's going in it? And what needs to come out of it. It just enrages me all the time that, you know, they sort of going, well, that little sliver will go over here. And the Indigenous community in this area, coupled with the poverty in the area, the need for food security and so forth, we're more than just a little forgotten. And Thunderbird House has just purchased a very expensive food serving trailer that we're going to be able to, you know, put out there and offer meals and so forth over the summer. We're going to give it some practice. I don't know how well my chili is going to go over, but we'll see. And but there's been a lot of consultation, a lot of talk. We've talked to our neighbors, from Thunderbird House to you know, the Salvation Army, people up and down the street. Just how can we work together? One of the ideas that came out of that, people say, well, it's not safe down there. You know, people camp out and they do this and they do that, and it's just too violent. And how does that work? Well, there are a number of organizations that work here, from Mama Bear to OPK, et cetera. Just take this idea. And so how can we use people that know the lived experience people on the street and know how to deal with them best to help bring us some more security. And one of the things that may sound a little odd, but we're contracting with through CARD with the commissionaires to train them how to be security guards. Now, don't freak out at the word security guard. That's the only way you can get a license to do that kind of work, is to have them train you. But we're also doing mental health first aid. We're doing some real experience in terms of practical experience on the street, how to revive somebody with Narcan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're calling it a SAB project. In other words, integrity, truth, and meeting people where they are. So yes, you'll have that little certificate saying you're a security guard, but it'll be with our brand on it. And it's a traditional way of talking to folks in there. So from the dialogue, I think, has been incredible. And I think it's not only helpful, but Mr. Toews referred to folks are back in 1978 saying enough studies, enough look at, or there's one more thing you need to do before you get funding, and so on. And there's always one more thing to do before you get funding. And it's not been looked at in terms of the size of the issue and problem here. Everybody gets a little bit, maybe, and we have to have a vision, and then we have to execute that vision. Anyways, I'll shut up. But people, when they drive by and they take a look, I don't know who did this quote. I've tried to, if I may share it, find out who the author was, but it says the greatest cruelty is our casual blindness to the despair of others. And I talk to friends of mine that drive by and they go, how can you work down there? It just looks terrible. This isn't working and that isn't working. And I said, stop complaining about it and, give me some money. I don't ask them that bluntly, but I will. Do something, get involved, come down. It's not a terrifying place. And anyways, so the development of the property is huge. And the last thing I'll say about that is there's one hotel on the property that I wish to buy, or we all wish to buy, and so that we can have more space and not, it's such a contradiction, for the whole setup there. And I'll just leave it at that. But we're hopeful. We're very hopeful.
Thank you, David, for sharing that update on Thunderbird and all the important work that you're doing and you're involved in there. Yeah, we usually are there right now for this report launch. I just love.
And I'm hoping you will be there for the next one next year.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Health orders and Doctors Manitoba directives allowing, yes.
Yes.
We would love to be there. And when you think of the region, there is the Aboriginal Center, the Niganon Center now, the old train station. And I know that there was a vision for even more development in that whole area. The Youth for Christ building, Kitty Corner. There was actually a vision for that land before, that, and people have criticized why that fulfilled the vision of the Indigenous people in the area who'd had a plan for the whole region. So yeah, I think this is really important in terms of the significant challenges, and the response needs to be in scale with what those are and done in a good way. So I'll move over to Gololcha. And yeah, just wondering if you can share your perspectives on a just recovery, the information we've heard today, and as somebody who is a immigrant to Winnipeg and now works with youth and works in community services.
Yeah, I think I'll be a little bit brief, but I think one of the things that really stands out is our cities, and maybe it's like a macro view but our cities won't be the same after COVID. And I think how we live, how we organize, and our communities, there's going to be long-lasting changes. But what's unique with the Winnipeg example is we have these huge swaths of land that are available to be redesigned by community at the heart of it. And I really hope that this report pushes a greater sense of mobilization amongst all communities. So newcomers, Indigenous, those with accessibility issues, all of us can come together to really push for our say and for our desires for these two huge pieces of lands, that we can maybe reshape what Winnipeg will look like. And I think on the other spin of that is, if nothing is done, I think it leads to maybe a lot more of a concerning and a dystopian version of what Winnipeg will look like, especially downtown Winnipeg will look like. For a lot of the young people, newcomers to the city, Indigenous people, those that have precarious housing, that kind of cohabit that space, it will be a very unfortunate situation if we're not able to really change what the situation at hand is presenting to us.
And if I may just ask one follow-up, what are some things that you think from, somebody with experience serving newcomers would be useful or helpful? Because there's so many people when they first arrive in Winnipeg, Central Park, they might be living close to there. That's where a lot of services are.
From my own experience, I think Portage Place was the first place that I went to buy my first clothes. I would get medicine from the shoppers. I would, if I was a good boy, I would get a treat from the Burger King upstairs. Or I would see my first film. I saw Lion King in IMAX at the Portage Place. So I think it represents a hub where people can get so much from. And I think when you look at the reality of the situation at hand, the environments in the downtown areas, there's not that many places where people can go and get these things. In addition to, I think there could be, and there should be, a lens of housing, because this is something that is a real need for not only the newcomer community, but just Winnipeggers in general. We have a lack of affordable housing, and I think these two huge swaths of land could go a long way in terms of providing opportunities for families, individuals to improve, when you look at even the social determinants of health that have been affected because of COVID, these spaces can really create a scenario where individuals can increase their likelihood of social mobility as well in this city. So I think it's really important that we really read the report, and I think community really comes together, and maybe we can mobilize to have something done in the very near future.
Thank you, Gololcha. Thank you all so much for your time here today. We will send out a follow-up email with the report link and video link for you all, and follow up with any next steps that we become aware of with everybody who registered today. The report is on our website, and so is the video. We'll put a recording of this launch up on our YouTube channel. CCPA Manitoba is the handle on YouTube. Thank you all. Thank you to our funders, United Way Winnipeg, Manitoba Research Alliance through the Social Sciences Humanities Research Council and the Jubilee Fund. And thank you to everyone who was part of this project. And thanks for being here. Stay safe and stay warm, and keep up your good and important work. And hopefully we'll see each other in person really soon. Thanks so much, everybody.